The Amnesty International report that comes out today is the type of attention-getting, headline-grabbing report that seems to fit in line with the dominant narrative of how the Syrian government is, of course, just torturing people and killing them at will, and that something must be done to stop this. But as that report pointed out, of course, the Amnesty International report itself is based on eyewitness reports, not on the ground reporting, and it's based on the ideas of people who are being implicated in this. I mean, the people who are part of the supposed opposition to this government. So it's a little bit like creating a report asking whether the banks were to blame for the 2008 financial meltdown and only talking to people from Goldman Sachs. I mean, we know which way that type of report is going to go, and so there has to be some skepticality of these types of reports. And I don't think we necessarily need to remind people just how important it is to be skeptical of all media reports in these times, especially when there seems to be a push towards rallying the public around a military intervention. But again, it has happened time and time again in recent history, even, let alone longer periods of history. And we see it, unfortunately, perhaps coming to fruition again here in Syria.
And I mean, foreign media is relying on anonymous sources, pictures of journalists, poor quality pictures, I should say, shot at indistinguishable locations, really, and they're broadcast as real events. Do you think that's fair?
Certainly not. In fact, there's even been the implication that some of the images we're being shown have been digitally manipulated, and there have been reports about that available online that you can watch of footage that was taken in Bahrain and said to be taken in Hama, and it's showing the same footage on different stations with different backgrounds digitally dropped in. So there are some very strange things that are going on right now, and unfortunately, we live in an age where media manipulation is so easy that it starts to become more and more difficult to tell reality from fiction, especially when so much of the Western media is controlled by so few corporations. It does certainly raise at least the specter of that type of whole-scale manipulation. But of course, manipulation can be also much more subtle than that, and there are many different ways in which the media can steer a conversation towards the direction that the establishment wishes, from suppressing information that goes against the grain to amplifying information that seems to suggest whatever the establishment is looking for, to framing the conversation in a certain way. If we can frame the conversation to talk about whether or not we need military intervention to stop the Assad government, that takes away from the real conversation that should be going on about how people who are genuinely concerned about the Syrian people can be supporting the Syrian people in doing what they need to do in terms of their respecting their own national sovereignty and their borders, instead of just reliving Libya and staging a military intervention, which we have seen has greatly destabilized that country. So again, there's a lot of different ways that this works, but again, it is complicated by the fact that, of course, that there is not freedom of movement among journalists in Syria. So it is difficult to put together these reports, and that has to be taken into account as well. So in some respects, perhaps the Assad government is doing it to itself.
Some international players, such as Turkey, for example, think the situation has reached a point where changes would be too little, too late. Do you agree with that?
Well, it might have reached that point in terms of the conversation that's being framed. But once again, it's a question of how the question is being put to the public and what kind of information that's based on. And once again, I mean, there are many different ways that can be done. And it's not to say that the idea that information that's contrary to the official narrative of the Assad government attacking peaceful protesters is necessarily completely suppressed. Sometimes we see that. There was an April report from the AFP that showed that the U.S. State Department has been funding the Syrian opposition and opposition in other of these supposed spontaneous Arab uprisings to the tune of $50 million. And there was a report in the Washington Post earlier this year that showed that the Syrian opposition has been backed by the U.S. State Department. So sometimes this information comes out, but when it does, it's generally reported on and quickly forgotten. Whereas anything that shows that even the suggestion that Assad is just killing people at random and willy-nilly in Syria is given a lot of amplification. So we see how that works, and then that changes the way that we can even look at the situation, whether it's too little, too late, and that sort of thing. It really depends on our understanding of what's happening in the country, which again is being completely framed by the media.
Just briefly now, the Syrian government says armed groups are to blame for instigating bloodshed during these demonstrations. Do you think that could be the case, or at least part of it?
Well, we certainly have to look at that possibility, especially when you ask yourself what possible reason the Assad government would have for attacking peaceful protesters while the scrutiny of the entire world is upon them, and the threat of military intervention is at least out there and on the table as these economic sanctions are closing in. What would be the point of this continued harsh crackdown? It does suggest that destabilization could be happening by armed snipers and others being inserted into these situations in order to blame on the Assad government. And if that's the case, then it certainly is working beautifully and is being reported on by Western media in a very unquizzical way. And that's why it's incumbent on the public to always be skeptical of these types of reports and to try to piece together things from many different sources.
All right, some very interesting points. James Corbett, Osaka-based editor of the independent news website CorbettReport.com. Thank you.